Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Please consider subscribing and check out our Patreon for more. Enjoy the video. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of streetlights filtering through thin curtains. A jumble of blankets and sheets lay tangled on the bed, evidence of another restless night. The alarm clock's red digits blinked 3:17 a.m., casting an eerie crimson hue across the nightstand. A muffled groan escaped from beneath the covers as Chris stirred, his body twitching and turning. Sweat beaded on his forehead, dampening the pillow. His eyes darted rapidly behind closed lids, lost in the depths of another vivid dream. In his mind's eye, a different world unfolded. Sunlight streamed through an open window, warming his skin. But it wasn't his skin, not the one he knew in his waking hours. Delicate hands with slender fingers stretched out before him. Nails painted a soft pink. Long chestnut hair cascaded over his shoulders as she stood up from a cozy window seat. "Chrissy, breakfast is ready, hun!" A voice called from downstairs. A smile spread across Chrissy's face as she padded barefoot across plush carpet. The mirror caught her attention as she passed, reflecting an image that felt more right than anything Chris had ever seen in the real world. Bright eyes, high cheekbones, and a graceful figure gazed back at her. "Coming, Mom!" The words flowed effortlessly, her voice light and musical. As Chrissy descended the stairs, the scent of coffee and bacon wafted up to greet her. The kitchen was bathed in warm morning light, her mother bustling about in a flowery apron. It all felt so natural, so comfortable, like slipping into a favorite sweater on a chilly day. "There's my girl," her mother beamed, setting a plate of pancakes on the table. "Big day ahead? You ready for your presentation?" Chrissy settled into a chair, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "As ready as I'll ever be. The team's been working on this project for months." Her mother squeezed her shoulder. "You'll knock 'em dead, sweetie. You always do." The scene shifted, and suddenly Chrissy found herself standing at a podium, facing a sea of attentive faces. Her heart raced, but not from fear, from exhilaration. This was her element. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady and confident. "Today marks a turning point in sustainable energy." Words flowed from her lips with passion and authority. Graphs and charts flashed on the screen behind her as she outlined revolutionary new solar technology. The audience hung on her every word, nodding and scribbling notes. As she concluded to enthusiastic applause, a sense of pride and accomplishment washed over her. This was who she was meant to be, a leader, an innovator, a woman making her mark on the world. The dream faded, replaced by another. Chrissy found herself in a cozy living room, curled up on a sofa with a cup of tea. Across from her sat a handsome man with kind eyes, listening intently as she spoke. "And then Sarah said the funniest thing about the new intern," Chrissy laughed, her eyes crinkling at the corners. The man chuckled, reaching out to take her hand. "I love hearing about your day, Chrissy. You always make even the mundane sound fascinating." A warm glow spread through her chest at his touch. This felt right. This connection, this intimacy. She leaned in, a soft hug. Back in the real world, Chris's body jerked, a small gasp escaping his lips. His eyes flew open, heart pounding as the dream world slipped away. For a moment, disorientation clouded his mind as he struggled to reconcile the two realities. As awareness returned, a familiar ache settled in his chest. The comfort and contentment of the dream lingered, making the harsh light of day even harder to face. Chris ran a hand over his stubbled jaw, the rough texture a stark contrast to the smooth skin he'd felt in his dream. With a heavy sigh, he swung his legs over the side of the bed and stumbled to the bathroom. The face that greeted him in the mirror was all wrong, angular where it should be soft, bristly where it should be smooth. Chris splashed cold water on his face, trying to wash away the lingering remnants of the dream. But it clung to him, as it always did. These dreams had been coming more frequently lately, each one more vivid and detailed than the last. And each time he woke, The disconnect between his dream self and his waking self grew more pronounced. As Chris went through the motions of his morning routine, showering, shaving, dressing in a crisp button-down and slacks, his mind kept drifting back to the dream. The ease with which he'd moved through the world as Chrissy, the sense of purpose and belonging he'd felt. It all seemed so tantalizingly real. At work, Chris found it increasingly difficult to focus. He stared blankly at his computer screen, the numbers and charts blurring before his eyes. In his mind, he could still see the confident way Chrissy had commanded the room during her presentation. "Earth to Chris!" A hand waved in front of his face, startling him out of his reverie. His co-worker, Jake, stood there with an amused expression. "Man, you were a million miles away. You okay?" Chris forced a smile. "Yeah, just didn't sleep well last night." Jake nodded sympathetically. "I hear ya. Hey, a bunch of us are grabbing beers after work. You in?" The thought of spending an evening trying to be one of the guys made Chris's stomach churn. He shook his head. "Thanks, but I think I'll pass. Rain check?" As Jake walked away, Chris slumped in his chair. The disconnect between his inner world and outer reality was becoming harder to ignore. He felt like an actor playing a role and doing a poor job of it. That evening, Chris found himself pacing his apartment, unable to shake the lingering effects of the dream. He caught sight of his reflection in a window and paused, really looking at himself. The broad shoulders, the square jaw, it all felt wrong, like ill-fitting clothes he couldn't take off. With trembling hands, he pulled out his phone and opened a search engine. For a moment, his fingers hovered over the keyboard, fear and uncertainty holding him back. Then, taking a deep breath, he typed, "Feel like a woman in dreams." As he scrolled through the results, a mix of emotions washed over him. Relief at seeing he wasn't alone in these feelings, fear at what it might mean. And underneath it all, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was an explanation for the discord he'd felt his entire life. One link led to another, and soon Chris found himself immersed in personal stories, medical information, and resources about gender identity and transition. Hours slipped by as he read, his heart racing with each new revelation. As the first light of dawn began to creep through his windows, Chris set down his phone. His mind was reeling, but for the first time in as long as he could remember, he felt a sense of clarity. The pieces were starting to fall into place. With shaking hands, he picked up his phone again and dialed a number he'd found during his research. As it rang, he took deep, steadying breaths. "Good morning, Meadowbrook Counseling Center. How may I help you?" Chris swallowed hard. I'd like to make an appointment with someone who specializes in gender identity issues." The receptionist's voice was warm and professional. "Of course, we have several therapists who work in that area. May I ask your name?" There was a pause, heavy with possibility. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Chrissy. My name is Chrissy." The words felt both terrifying and exhilarating to say out loud, like taking the first step on a long, uncertain journey. "All right, Chrissy, I have an opening next Tuesday at 2 p.m. with Dr. Elena Martinez. Would that work for you?" "Yes," Chrissy replied, her voice growing stronger. "Yes, that would be perfect." As she hung up the phone, a mix of fear and excitement coursed through her veins. She had no idea what lay ahead, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she was moving in the right direction. The days leading up to the appointment passed in a blur. Chrissy found herself hyper-aware of every interaction, every glance in the mirror. She began to notice things she'd always pushed aside. The discomfort of wearing masculine clothes, the way she instinctively softened her voice in casual conversation. When Tuesday finally arrived, Chrissy's nerves were at an all-time high. She'd taken the afternoon off work, claiming a doctor's appointment. As she sat in the waiting room of Meadowbrook Counseling Center, her leg bounced nervously. "Chrissy?" a gentle voice called. She looked up to see a woman with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair smiling at her. "I'm Dr. Martinez. Please come in." The office was warm and inviting, with soft lighting and comfortable chairs. As Chrissy settled in, Dr. Martinez took a seat across from her. "So, Chrissy," she began, her voice calm and reassuring, "what brings you here today?" For a moment, Chrissy struggled to find the words. How could she possibly explain the tumult of emotions, the years of confusion and disconnect? I've been having these dreams," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dreams where I'm a woman, and they feel more real than my waking life." Dr. Martinez nodded encouragingly. "Can you tell me more about these dreams?" As Chrissy began to describe the vivid world she experienced in her sleep, the words started to flow more easily. She talked about the sense of peace and rightness she felt as her female self, the way everything just clicked into place. "And when I wake up," she continued, her voice cracking slightly, "it's like I'm trapped in the wrong body, like I'm playing a part I never auditioned for. Doctor?" Martinez listened attentively, occasionally asking gentle questions to draw out more details. As Chrissy spoke, she felt a weight lifting off her shoulders. For the first time, she was giving voice to feelings she'd buried deep for so long. "Chrissy," Dr. Martinez said softly when she'd finished, "what you're describing is not uncommon for individuals questioning their gender identity. These dreams seem to be your subconscious mind's way of expressing your true self." Chrissy's heart raced at these words. "So, you think I might be transgender?" "That's something only you can determine," Dr. Martinez replied. "But based on what you've shared, it's certainly a possibility worth exploring. How does that make you feel?" A mix of emotions washed over Chrissy. Fear, excitement, relief. "Scared," she admitted, "but also, maybe I'm finally understanding why I've always felt so out of place." Dr. Martinez smiled warmly. "Those are all very normal reactions. Questioning one's gender identity can be a challenging process, but it can also be incredibly liberating. I'm here to support you as you navigate this journey." As the session continued, Dr. Martinez provided Chrissy with information about gender dysphoria, transitioning, and resources for the transgender community. They discussed potential next steps, including ways Chrissy could safely explore her gender identity. When the hour was up, Chrissy felt both overwhelmed and invigorated. As she stood to leave, Dr. Martinez handed her a card. "This is for a support group for individuals questioning their gender identity," she explained. "They meet every Thursday evening. It might be helpful to connect with others who are on similar journeys." Chrissy clutched the card like a lifeline. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For listening, for understanding." Dr. Martinez's eyes crinkled with a gentle smile. "You've taken a brave first step, Chrissy. Remember, this is your journey. There's no rush, no right or wrong way to explore your identity. We'll take it one step at a time." As Chrissy left the office, she felt a glimmer of hope she hadn't experienced in years. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt like she was moving towards something real, something true. Over the next few weeks, Chrissy threw herself into research and self-exploration. She devoured books and articles about gender identity, watched countless videos of transgender individuals sharing their stories, and spent hours on online forums connecting with others in similar situations. At home, she began experimenting with her appearance in small ways. She grew out her nails, practiced applying makeup when no one was around, and ordered a few items of feminine clothing online. The first time she slipped on a silky blouse and looked in the mirror, tears sprang to her eyes. It felt right in a way nothing ever had before. Chrissy also started attending the support group Dr. Martinez had recommended. At first, she was terrified, lurking in the back of the room and barely speaking. But as the weeks went by, she found herself opening up, sharing her experiences and drawing strength from the stories of others. One evening, as the group was wrapping up, a trans woman named Alexis approached her. "Hey, I just wanted to say I really related to what you shared tonight. The dreams, the feeling of disconnect. I went through something similar when I was first questioning." Chrissy felt a surge of relief at these words. Really? How did you know for sure? Alexis smiled softly. It wasn't any one moment. It was a gradual realization that the person I was in my dreams, the woman I was, that was the real me. And once I accepted that, everything else started to fall into place. As they talked, Chrissy felt a weight lifting off her shoulders. Here was someone who truly understood, who had walked the path she was just beginning to explore. Listen, Alexis said as they were leaving. A bunch of us are going to a trans-friendly club next weekend. It's a safe space to express yourself, try out different looks. You should come. Chrissy's heart raced at the idea. It was terrifying, but also thrilling. I'd like that, she found herself saying. The night of the club outing arrived, and Chrissy stood in front of her mirror, hardly recognizing herself. She'd spent hours getting ready, applying makeup with shaking hands and slipping into a dress she'd ordered online. The person staring back at her was a stranger, yet somehow more familiar than the reflection she'd seen her whole life. As she entered the club, Chrissy's nerves were on fire. But the warmth with which Alexis and the others greeted her began to ease her anxiety. As the night wore on, she found herself relaxing, even dancing a little. In the pulsing lights of the club, surrounded by people expressing themselves freely, Chrissy felt a sense of belonging she'd never experienced before. For the first time, she wasn't pretending, wasn't hiding. She was just herself. As the weeks turned into months, Chrissy continued to explore her identity, both in therapy and in her personal life. She began to open up to a few close friends, terrified of their reactions but needing to share her truth. To her relief and gratitude, most were supportive. There were awkward moments and difficult conversations, but the freedom of being honest about who she was outweighed the challenges. At work, Chrissy still presented as male, but she began to feel increasingly uncomfortable in that role. The disconnect between her true self and the persona she put on for the office became more pronounced each day. During one therapy session, Dr. Martinez gently broached the subject.
Chrissy, we've talked about how you're feeling more comfortable expressing your true gender identity in your personal life. Have you given any thought to transitioning at work? Chrissy's stomach churned at the idea.
I don't know if I'm ready for that, she admitted. What if I lose my job? What if people don't accept me? Dr. Martinez nodded understandingly. Those are valid concerns, Chrissy. Many transgender individuals face similar fears when considering coming out at work. But it's important to remember that you have rights, and many companies have policies in place to protect LGBT employees. Chrissy fidgeted with the hem of her skirt, a nervous habit she'd developed over the past few months.
I know, but it's one thing to read about policies. It's another to actually live it. You're absolutely right, Dr. Martinez agreed. Which is why we'll take this step by step, just like everything else in your journey. Have you looked into your company's specific policies regarding gender identity and expression?
Chrissy shook her head.
No, I've been too scared to even search for it on the company intranet. What if someone in IT sees...
Dr. Martinez smiled gently.
That's a common fear, but remember, accessing company policies isn't suspicious. It's your right as an employee. Still, if you're uncomfortable, we can look up general guidelines for transitioning in the workplace. Would that feel safer to you?
Yeah, Chrissy nodded, feeling a small wave of relief. That might help. Together, they spent the rest of the session researching best practices for workplace transitions. By the end, Chrissy felt a bit more grounded, though the idea still terrified her.
Remember, Dr. Martinez said as their time drew to a close, there's no rush. You can take this at your own pace, and we'll be here to support you every step of the way.
As Chrissy left the office, her mind was swirling with possibilities and fears. The thought of being her true self at work was both exhilarating and terrifying. She was so lost in thought that she almost ran into someone entering the building. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, looking up to see a familiar face. It was Jake from work. For a moment, they both froze, equally surprised to see each other. Chrissy's heart hammered in her chest. She was dressed in feminine clothing, her makeup carefully applied. There was no way to hide who she was in this moment. Jake's eyes widened as recognition dawned. "Chris, are you—" Chrissy took a deep breath, steeling herself. "It's Chrissy, actually," she said, her voice wavering slightly. I'm transgender. I've been seeing a therapist here to help me figure things out." She braced herself for disgust, anger, or worse. But to her surprise, Jake's expression softened. "Oh," he said, then paused as if searching for the right words. Wow, that must have been really tough to keep to yourself. Are you okay?" The kindness in his voice brought tears to Chrissy's eyes. "I'm getting there," she managed to say. "It's been a journey." Jake nodded, looking a bit out of his depth, but genuinely concerned. "Listen, I don't really know much about this stuff, but if you ever need someone to talk to at work or just backup or whatever, I'm here. Okay?" Chrissy felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Thank you, Jake. That means more than you know." As they parted ways, Chrissy felt a mix of emotions. The accidental outing had been scary, but Jake's reaction gave her a glimmer of hope. Maybe coming out at work wouldn't be as disastrous as she feared. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out Patreon for a lot more content and early access to YouTube videos.